Everyone, welcome to part 4 in designing a road in Civil 3D. Now, in part 1, we looked on how to do the horizontal alignment, part 2, the vertical profile, part 3 is assemblies, and now we're gonna look on how to create our corridors. Now, it's not the last part, there is one more part, so hit the subscribe button so you can stay notified when it comes out, because that's the part where we're gonna learn how to create the junctions. In this video, we're gonna show you how to create the corridors based on all the elements that we've created in the previous videos. All these tutorials have a downloadable file that you can download so you can follow along. So without further ado, let's begin. Just to recap, we have our alignment for road 1 and road 2. The alignment shows how left and right the road goes in terms of the horizontal element. And we have the vertical profile for road 1 and road 2, which basically describes how up and down the road goes. And then we have the assembly, which basically describes what the road is going to be made of. When we create a corridor, basically we're combining all these three elements. So we're combining the horizontal alignment and the vertical profile into one line, if you can imagine that. And then the assembly to create the shape of the road. Little quick drawing that I've created for you guys so you can understand it. So if you imagine that this is your assembly for 1 meter and this is your horizontal profile, when you come and create your corridor, what we'll do is add that assembly as many times as you decide based on the frequency, which is a setting that we'll cover later on. And you can see that this is eventually creates your road shape, and then from there you can create your surface. So enough all this jibber jabber, let's dive into on how to create the corridor. We're gonna go to Home, the Create Design panel, select the corridor and click Corridor. Now the Create Corridor window will appear, and here there is two schools of thoughts. One school of thought is put all roads under one corridor. That means that all your alignments that you have, you can put them all under one corridor, and the junctions as well. The other school of thought, which I came across recently, was that they create a corridor for each road junction, so they keep them all separate. Now, I haven't come across this method in UK's consultancy that I've worked with, so maybe this is somewhere else, like maybe America, they do that. There must be a reason they do it. So if you know, let me know in the comments below so we can also know which one is the more correct, sustainable way to do it. But in our case, we're gonna do all the roads under one corridor. So we're gonna name the corridor just corridor. Description, we can give it a description if you like. The corridor styles, I'm gonna leave them as is, but if you wanna understand what they do, is basically they control the presentation of the corridors. For example, the codes style. If I wanna go here and go to edit current selection, in the codes, you can see I've got links, points, and shapes, which is based on the sub-assembly, if you remember. So we've got the back of curb, but then in the links, you can see that we have, for example, curb. So the curb has a render material of precast smooth, and it has a material of none, and we have a pay item. So you can classify all this, so we can come later on to help you with your quantities, which we're not gonna cover. But it's good to know that this is how you can control how they look and their properties. Now in my case, I'm gonna leave the ones as they are. If they're different from yours, that is because I'm using the UKIE package, which is the UK Ireland Civil 3D package. Now the target surface is grayed out because we haven't selected an alignment profile or assembly like to target to. So the corridor will have the alignment profile and assembly, and inside of it we will have a new thing called regions, which will jump in a bit. So for now, let's select our alignment. So we're gonna go and select from here, drop down road 1. Then you can see the vertical profile automatically got selected. So if it wasn't, make sure you select the correct vertical profile. This horizontal alignment is the existing surface profile that was automatically created when we created the vertical profile for road 1. So I'm going to select VP road 1, and the assembly, if you remember from part 3, we talked about the naming convention, and you can see here that's where the naming convention comes in handy, because now I can see its full carriageway, and then I can see the description of carriageway from left to right. So I've got 1 in 3 daylight, 1 meter verge, 2 meter footway, 6 meter carriageway, 2 meter footway, 1 verge, and 1 in 3 daylight. So I'm going to select that. And as soon as I selected the assembly, the target surface became enabled, so for me to select. And that's because I also have a daylight that I need to target. So in my case, I'm going to select the existing ground. Now, I can go and create row 2 as well, but I'm going to leave it so I can show you another way of doing it. So I'm just going to hit OK. And then this window will appear, which is the baseline and region parameters for the corridor. So the baseline, you can see as soon as I selected it, is basically my horizontal alignment in combination with the vertical profile. So think of the baseline as the horizontal and vertical profile combined, because you can see here the column HA Road 1 and VP Road 1. Now, if we select the sub item, which is the region, for now you cannot see what it is. So I'm just gonna hit OK. And you can see my road has been created, my corridor. So we have, from the start, we can see we have 2 blue grips, and that is to control the extent of the corridor. So if I pull it back, you can see that the corridor stops right here. But if I pull it all the way to there, it follows and stops where the alignment is. So it's good to know about this because we're gonna cover it when we come and design junctions. Now, let's go again. Let's select our corridor, and it will create a new tab, corridor. The name of the corridor is corridor. And then we're going to go to corridor properties. Now, we have our information, and here again, we have our parameters. So you can see we have our baseline, which is the horizontal and vertical combined. And then we have our region, RG. And you can see it's all this purple selected. So basically, a region is an area, section of your corridor. So you can have multiple regions within your corridor. And then these regions have their own properties. For example, you can have different assemblies within one corridor. For example, you can have first half of the road, it will be a separate region, will be, for example, 4 meters carriageway, and then you can have another region that changes the assembly to 6 meter carriageway. Now we will cover this in part 5, but for now I want to show you how to create the corridors and get you familiar with this window because we will be using this a lot. So we have our road 1, which is the baseline. So I like to make sure I don't add unnecessary names. So you can see that is my road 1 baseline. The codes, we're not touching the codes as we discussed this presentation, the appearance, here's the feature lines, and this is the section if you want to create the surface. And these are boundaries and slope patterns. But for our case, we'll be focusing here. I'm going to hit OK. I'm just going to show you another way to access the corridor. So if you select the corridor, just right click, corridor properties, and we'll go back to this window. We want to create a corridor for road 2 now. Let's do that. So I'm just going to go to corridor. And you can see here that we could have created a separate corridor for row 2, but I said that we're gonna do it by adding everything into one corridor. So the way to bring the window back up is right click corridor properties, or also to go through the corridors in the prospector and then expand the corridors and right click properties. Now you can see there's this button add baseline. So I'm gonna click on it. And you can see this is my baseline. So I'm gonna select the alignment. I'm gonna select row 2. Make sure the vertical profile is selected and the assembly again selected. And then hit OK. And now you can see I've got row 2. And then the region is not selected because we haven't created the corridor yet. So if I hit OK, you can see that we have this all as one corridor. And probably that's why people split it in separate corridors. So when you select one corridor, you can see one selection. Yeah, it's just we've been doing it as one corridor in all the consultancies I've worked for, and it works out just fine. I'm just going to go to corridor properties just to show you the region. You can see that now this is the baseline for row 2. And let's just make sure that it doesn't have these numbers. And then we have the region. I'm going to hit OK. And you can see that when I select the corridor, I also have these grips again. So they've been added. Now, when we're going to come and create our junction, you will need to push these grips slightly back because what we're going to do is basically tell the software, hey, create another baseline, which will be for the entry and exit carriageway. But for now, we're not going to focus on the junctions. All we're going to do is just focus on how to create the corridors and then dive into the regions. So let's create another assembly. I'm going to do it very quickly by just copying all this, moving it downwards, and just making sure I change the name. So I'm just going to go to properties so I can see the full name here. And then I'm going to make this carriageway, let's say 4 meters. I'm just going to then come here in the assemblies, select the 2 assemblies. They're 3 meters, so I'm just going to change them to 2. So you can see now it becomes 4. We're going to go and split the region. So I'm going to go to the corridor tab, split region, or right click, modify region, split region. So now you can see that highlights this region. You can see that pink line very faintly. Then when I select this region, you can see it shows me a line and goes, where do you want to split the region? Well, I want to split it towards the end of the road because I don't want to mess with it too much. I'm going to split it here. So now you can see that I have this new grips in here, and that is because we have a new region. If I go to corridor properties, you can see that now under base road 1, I have the first region, and then I have the second region I just created. And this is where it comes, and you can start creating more complex road, and I can change the assembly. And I just click on the line, and then I'm gonna do the 4-meter carriageway, and I'm just gonna hit OK, then OK again. And you can see that it starts becoming 4 meters. Some people might ask, wait, what's happening with this transition? That is because it's of the frequency. But yeah, so if I go and let's say go to corridor properties, and in here there is a column called frequency. I'm just gonna go here and change it every 1 meter, for example, and change all these. So along tangent lines, curve, increment along spirals, and a vertical profile. Change them all to 1, hit OK, and then apply. You can see that immediately what happened is the frequency of the road, which is basically how frequently do you want the assembly to be. It was before like this. So when this road was, let's say from 4 meters, from 6 meters was going to 4, it took that long to taper in to become 4. But when we increase the frequency to 1 meter, what happens is that line where the point we started the region becomes like this, but obviously we increased it to like 1 meter, so therefore this is way closer. So it made the dogleg shape of this. To smooth this out, what I usually like doing is just add a transition to it, which we will cover again in a different tutorial. I just wanted to show you that this is how you can control different regions. For example, let's say we're going to keep the carriageway width the same, but I do not want to have a daylight because I'm going to have houses on this side for some weird reason. So I'm just going to come here, change this one to, again, to, let's say 3 meters. So it becomes again the 6-meter corridor, but I don't want to have a daylight. And I'm going to delete the daylight and just let's fix the name, assembly properties. So we don't have a daylight and it is 6 meters. So now if I go to my corridors and rebuild, right click to rebuild corridors, you can have it as automatic, but I would advise against it if you're working on big models. You can see that now my daylight stops right there. And if I just go to object viewer, just so you can see how it looks, you can see that, and let's go to realistic. You can see that my verge is there, but my daylight has disappeared. And we will have to do the same here so we can create our junction, because we cannot have a junction with a footpath in the middle. So let's go do that so we can prepare our file for the next tutorial. So we're going to create, we're just going to copy paste this one all the way down. And then I'm just going to go to corridor assembly properties. So we're driving from south to north. So the right hand side will be absent. So we're going to remove the footpath, the verge, and the daylight. And I'm just going to call it not full carriageway, but just right hand side junction. Actually, I'll name it right hand side incoming junction. So basically what I'm telling the software is that on the right hand side, you'll be expecting a junction here. So now let's go split it again. So I'm just going to select my corridor. I'm just going to go to right click, modify region, split region. I'm going to select this one and I want to split it, let's say where the tangent is, maybe slightly 1 meter after that, just to give it some space. And then I'm going to click again because I'm still on the split command and split it over here. So now you can see that we have 2 new grips, and then if we go to corridor properties, you can see that we have the region, second, third, and then the 4th one we created on top. So you can go through the process of naming this just to make it easier for you. So for example, I'm going to name this region. I'm just going to give it a call junction. So let's see, junction, just so I can know that this is the junction. So therefore, I'm just going to come and change the assembly. I'm going to change it to right-hand side incoming junction and hit OK. And now you can see, if we go to Object Viewer, just to show it better, what I'm going to do then is just create this baseline and this baseline to create our junction. So this is how we do it. Now, we need to make sure that this corridor are tying in to the correct level, because if you recall, we drew corridor 2 into the air. So therefore, we want to, with accuracy, say like, hey, corridor 2 actually ties in right there. So this is where we're going to come and do the following. We're going to select the corridor, and then we're going to go to corridor surfaces. And then in the surfaces, we're going to click on this button to create a corridor surface. And then the specify code, which is the top, like the top surface of the corridor. And I'm going to click the plus icon. Now in the boundaries, I want to select the corridor and just corridor extend as outer boundary, because I don't want to create unnecessary triangles. I'm just going to hit OK. And you can see that it created my triangles and this is absent, right? So, and let's go to actually change it to, I don't know, contours, just so you can see the contours. And you can see that most of the contours look absolutely fine, but we have a little issue here. This is not what we modeled in the vertical profile. So why is this happening? So let's go have a look. Let's check first the corridor properties, like the frequency. So right click, corridor properties, and let's make sure in road 1, we set all the frequencies to 1, 1, 1, and 1, and hit OK and apply. Will that fix it? That should do the trick. If that fixed it. Now we need to make sure before we start creating our junctions, which is in the next tutorial, we want to set up everything correctly, because the junctions, it's its own like whole subject by itself. So I want to make sure we've prepared everything for the junctions. We need to make sure that road 2 ties in right here. Now I know the alignment continues all the way there, but we need to make sure road 2 ties in there. So let me create 2 viewports. So just so I can bring the vertical profile as well. So this is road 2, and you can see that road 2, and if I select the profile and then station tracker, all viewports, you can see it should stop. Let me bring it here. It should stop here, right? The vertical profile, because after that, it's road 1. So how do I know where I'm supposed to connect? To do that, we need to add the surface into the vertical profile. To do that, we need to add the surface into the vertical profile of road 2. So we select the alignment of road 2, go to surface profile, and we add the new corridor surface we created. And make sure we change the style, let's say, to something different so we can be able to distinguish it, and hit OK. Now you can see it got added in here. So if I grab this and move it all the way to there, you can see it connected. Now, if you had all this, the corridor, let's select the corridor, all the way to here, that would cause a nightmare of issues, you can see here. And that is because you have 2 baselines on top of each other, which doesn't help you. So the reason we pushed it all the way back is for the junctions creation, like to make it easier, and also for the boundaries, because some people do not use the boundary option, and therefore these become interconnected, and therefore you cannot change it. And that is very important. So the fix around, if you have not in the corridor surfaces, let's go to corridor properties and in the surfaces, in the boundaries, if you haven't added the boundary, so let's remove the boundary, just hit OK. You can see what happens is it triangulates the surface, and let's bring the triangles. You can see, I don't want to see all this. However, in some cases, you might need it because you might have a gap between your corridors when you want to show a transition in a dirty way, like not that dirty way, but you want to create a transition between 4 meters and 6 meters. You don't want to actually model the in between. So what you do is leave the gap and let the triangles do the work for you. So that is workarounds in Civil 3D. However, when you've done it this way, what happens is when I try to move my vertical profile, you can see what happens is I no longer know where exactly I'm tying in, because the triangles are affecting the actual surface. So you would think, oh yeah, you know what? I think I'm actually connecting right here. You might actually be right. But in order to be 100% sure, what I would suggest you to do is select your corridor. In the corridor properties, in the parameters, turn off the road that you're working the vertical profile to. And now you can see that actually this is my vertical profile of road 2, and there is nothing there to connect. This is just a triangulation being weird. And this is right when I'm trying to connect. So I'm going to connect here. And then I'm just going to turn back on. Let's select our corridor. Road 2 and hit OK. And you can see if I switch back to the contours, you can see roughly that the contours doesn't look bad. Like you can say, oh, it's already done. Now, if you're doing road design very quick and dirty and you don't want to spend time doing junctions, this is one way to do it. However, we're going to stop here. And the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create the junction so you can get the definition and also the corridor to go around the junction turning heads. I know it was a lot and it's a complex topic, like you have to go back and forth. So let me know how I did. And if it was too bad, I'll create another tutorial and simplify everything. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in part 5.